Right, Steve gachtainna agus fáilte over rash chuig an shrach garma What It Takes. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the UCD What It Takes Employability Series. I'm Neve, and I'm part of the UCD Alumni Relations Programme. This is the 5th episode of our Spring 2022 series, focusing on what it takes to innovate your career with design thinking. We'll be hearing from 2 stellar speakers this afternoon. So first, we'll hear from Linehan, creativity and innovation consultant and leadership coach, and then we'll be joined by educational provocateur, serial entrepreneur, course director and radio presenter Dr. Lollie Mancey. Afterwards, of course, we'll have our 15 minutes for the audience questions, led by the our lovely colleague Michelle Cohen, who's a careers consultant with UCD Careers Network. So be sure to drop any questions you'll have into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and our speakers will try and answer as many of them as possible at the end of the session. Finally, the session is being recorded, so if you want to revisit it, or if you're having any trouble with connectivity this afternoon, you can always find it on our UCD Alumni YouTube channel, starting from tomorrow. So we'll pop the link in the chat there now. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Hannah.
Thanks very much. And yes, I'm just going to go to a quick slide share. And hopefully that comes up full screen for you all and you can see it okay. So Neve, you might just give me a nod if that's not coming up.
Yeah, we can see that.
Perfect. Thanks so much. So look, welcome all. And as the girls have said, it's about design thinking today, but really about thinking differently and how you can think differentally, which will lead to greater success in your career. So a bit of intro on myself. I'm the founder and CEO of Blue Kaizen. So as Neve kindly said, I'm an innovation and creativity consultant, but I also do some leadership coaching. It's neuroscience based. So I'll be bringing both of those sides of my business together to deliver what will be quite a whistle stop tour, quick 10 minutes, and then we'll be passing over to Lollie. And then after Lollie, we'll be opening up to a lovely Q&A hosted by Michelle. So what we discuss, really along the lines of looking at creativity around topics to do with the brain. What is design thinking? Very briefly, I'm not going to go too deeply into that because I know Lollie has some good stuff to talk to you about it on it, but really how it will help you looking at your career, and then some practical tools and tips. So before we begin, can I just ask you please to think, how do you approach creativity and problem solving? Do you come at it with the confidence of a 6-year-old in a superhero cape, or do you sit back and maybe procrastinate to an Olympic level possibly, or check in with yourself? What sort of emotions come up for you when you're thinking about creativity and problem solving? So with just that in mind, there's Albert Einstein, a very smart guy indeed, came up with this, and he said we can't solve problems using the same kind of thinking we use to create them. And I'd just like you to consider that. It was very important to shake up your thinking if you want to solve problems and be more creative. So I put this image up, and it's kind of a little bit controversial because it speaks to left brain versus right brain thinking. And that myth has been quashed, that there isn't just one side of the brain. And really creativity is many interacting cognitive processes that happen throughout the brain. It involves your subconscious, your conscious, your emotions, and depending on which stage of the innovation or creativity journey you are at, you will be engaging in different regions of the brain. So how we are able to draw on those interconnections in the brain is really going to help us be more creative. But one thing to bear in mind is if you engage in creative pursuits, that's really good for building those strong connections throughout the brain, which will help to better creativity. So, beg your pardon. If you look at the subconscious versus the conscious, so your subconscious is like the workhorse. It's 90% of the capacity of what your brain is doing in the background. It's much faster neural networks, but it's where all of your habits are happening. Your habitual thinking, the stuff you don't even realize your brain is working on, it just happens anyway. But your conscious is 10%, and we wouldn't be able to do the thinking, that heavy thinking that your conscious does without all the habits that are working along in the background in your subconscious. So your conscious thinking is very energy consuming, all of that. So think about it. The more habits you can put in place, it frees up part of your brain to do some heavy lifting. So creating good habits helps you be more creative. Okay. So I was putting this presentation together and it struck me, there's a quote from Picasso, and myself and Lollie were talking about, you know, the child brain, and every child, says Picasso, is born an artist. The problem is remaining an artist once we grow up. And that is because we are challenged through the education systems that we educate out creativity out of children. And it's really important to kind of go back to your inner child, go back to that creativity that your inner child has and be able to tap into it. Also, the education system educate from the shoulders up. They educate your brain. They don't, and I will be talking about it, about there's 3 brains in your system. They don't tap into all of those. They just tap into the piece inside your skull. And education systems also, the traditional Western education systems, they to the rote learning, they tell us what is right, but they intuitively tell us that being wrong can be bad, and we gain a fear of being wrong. So all of that can actually be inhibitors to us being creative and tapping into our full creative potential. So as I said, there's a head, a heart, and a gut brain. So if you look at each of them, the one inside your skull, and we speak of brains because it's your nervous system, and your nervous system goes through your head, your heart, and your gut. But your head, and you often say, like, oh, I have to get outside my head. It's really all that detailed analysis, that logic and reasoning that goes up inside your head. If you bring yourself down into your heart brain, you're tapping into your memories, your emotions, your feelings, and a lot of imagery. And you go further down into your gut brain and you're tapping into instinct, your identity. It's much more immediate, the reaction you can have with your gut brain, and it's around self-preservation. So just bear that in mind if you are thinking about creativity, to engage all of your brains. So with that in mind, we'll look at design thinking. Well, what is it? And I'm not going to go too much into the nuts and bolts of it, but just remember, design thinking is mainly used and more heavily used in designing products that are going to meet consumer needs. But really what we want to leverage here is that it changes the way you think about a problem. It involves all of your brains, and it talks about divergent and convergent thinking, which I'm going to come back to in a minute. But it does utilize a growth mindset and the ability to deal with ambiguity and risk. It's okay to fail. So going back to that child inside you, that child for creativity. So it's not just for designers and innovators, and even the most traditional thinkers can adopt and change and use design thinking for more creativity. So I put up this, this is what you will traditionally see if you Google design thinking. Many variations on a theme here. This is from the Stanford D School, and they were very early on in putting up a lot of thinking around design thinking, but it has been iterated by the likes of IDEO Labs, who added on a 6th stage to do with sharing the ideas, etc. But in essence, you're talking about empathizing with the customer, and in this case, customers, you, defining what the problem is, ideating solutions, prototyping, and then testing. And it's an iterative process. You go back through it. But really what we talk about is the ability to leverage the divergent and convergent thinking that design thinking is so famous for. So what does that really mean? So in divergent thinking, which is creating all the choices, you're going wild with ideas, you're deferring judgment, and you're generating lots of possibilities. And when I say yes and, it's not no but. So we're going, if I think of something, this could be a possibility. Yes, and I can do this as well. So it's all very positive, all very open, and you're going for a lot of quantity of ideas at this stage. In convergent thinking, you're not dismissing ideas, you're improving on them. You're coming now to more of a judgment and a decision stage, and you're going to test and evaluate all of the ideas that you have generated within the divergent stage. So in design thinking, The phases overall, we're talking about empathy, defining the problem, ideating solutions, and prototyping and testing. Design thinking for you in your career, you are the customer. That's the only difference. You become the customer. The process using design thinking is exactly the same. So I would encourage you to consider and think about the language. It's really important, the language and the self-talk you use when you're talking about design thinking in your career. So you need to talk about using the word why. Why is quite a negative word. It can put people on the defensive, but also it can shut down your thinking. So when I said yes and, that can open up your thinking. So you talk about get rid of the word but. Get rid of why and get rid of but. I know we're getting rid of loads of words here, but they really help in how you're going to talk to yourself when you're going through the creativity process that design thinking involves. State everything that you're going to talk about with yourself about your career in the positive. So instead of saying, well, I haven't got X qualification, I'm going to get X qualification. So it's just rephrase everything in the positive and give yourself perspective through the language you are using. So sometimes people will say things like, oh, during the lockdown, I can't go outside. I was like, well, there's other things I can do inside. But the language and self-talk, keep everything positive. It will open up your thinking and enable you to be more creative, which puts design thinking at an easier level. So timing is everything. And we're funny creatures when it comes to our brains and our bodies. But I say picking the time you're going to be creative is quite important. And that's to do with the body's natural production of neurotransmitters and hormones. So the one I can usually never say, norepinephrine, yep, didn't say that right, and dopamine and cortisol generally are produced from when you wake up to 8 hours into your day. And if you're thinking about, these are all going to produce alertness, focus, and it's a great time to do all the tasks that take analysis, heavy thinking, critical thinking, and focus. And usually we'll have a little cup of coffee, but I would say the advice being maybe postpone the cup of coffee for about an hour and a half after you wake up for it to be most effective in your system. Then about 9 to 16 hours after you wake up, the serotonin levels in your body will naturally increase. And that leads your body to be more relaxed. That's a key state for your body to be in, to be creative and to do brainstorming. So if you're talking about timing when you're going to do some design thinking and creativity around your career, think about those of what your body's naturally doing anyway and leverage the advantage that it can give you. So I'm just going to put these up. They're around challenging negative thoughts. And in speaking to a lot of clients that I would be coaching, when we're talking about ourselves, we can be very critical. We can shut down our ideas and we talk to ourselves in quite a bad way. But there's a lot of negative thoughts that can come up in your system. And there's a couple of tools you can use to fight those negative thoughts, particularly when you're trying to be creative. And decatastrophizing is one of them. And that's really saying, what's the worst that could happen? It's not saying what if, it's saying what is the worst thing that can happen, and it takes the power away from a negative thought and enables you to put more positive spin on it. Putting your thoughts on trial, and this is a fun one of mine, and this is where you, if you have a negative thought, you put it on trial. So first you become the defense attorney and you state all of the reasons in support of that negative thought. Then you become the prosecutor. So you prosecute that negative thought by putting down all of the ideas. Now, remember, we're dealing facts only, not emotions. Put down all of the reasons why it is a bad idea to have that negative thought. And then be the judge. Bring some balance in and have a balanced opinion around that negative thought. So Socratic questioning. So Socrates, the Greek philosopher, he was talking about educating on ideas based on questioning. So if you want to take benefit from Socratic thinking, ask yourself some questions. And it really takes about 1 to 3 minutes on each question. So it's very quick, but really, you know, is the negative thought realistic? Is there any evidence for this negative thought? Am I basing this negative thought on facts or emotions? And am I misinterpreting any evidence that might be coming up for this negative thought? So you can use Socratic thinking to analyze your negative thoughts and get rid of them. Values and beliefs. If you're making career decisions, I would strongly advise you get in touch with your values, understand what your values are, and challenge your own beliefs. Some people are very good at doing this on their own, and some people need a little help, and maybe it's time to invest in a coach or somebody in that space to help you through it. But it is well worth your time to make a value-based decision on your career. One thing I would say is memories and emotions, and these are really, really vital when you're talking about how you look at your career, how you look at where you are, and changing the emotions you feel at that time. So for example, if you want to feel more confident, your brain does not know the difference in emotions from a memory and something that's happening right now. It will produce the exact same neurological response. So for example, if you want to feel more confident when you're doing your design thinking about your career, or even when you're going to an interview, you can actually create that response in your body by tapping into a memory from a time where you felt extremely confident. The more senses you can involve, like what did you feel temperature-wise at the time? What were you wearing? Was it a sunny day? Did you have the taste of coffee from that morning in your mouth? Did you hear any noise? Were you inside? Were you outside? All of the senses you can tap into will make your system latch onto that memory as a lived experience now, and you will generate those emotions in your body. It can be very, very powerful when you're going through creative thinking and when you're getting your system set for a positive response. So I'd say there's a couple of tools, and I'm not going to go in depth to all of them. There is bucket loads of tools you can use for being more creative and using design thinking out there. And the elevator pitch is one really good one if you're looking at your career and you're looking at a way to be able to have your pitch, your description of yourself and what you want really, really quick. So it's the time you would take to go up 10 floors in an elevator. And if you met your ideal employer or somebody in that lift, could you, by the time you've reached the floor you're going to, have explained to them your skills, what you're about and what you're looking for? The systems maps, these are brilliant, and I find them really useful to use with clients, of looking at all the things in your network, what's around you for support and for help. And the business model canvas, a great one, particularly for those other entrepreneurs out there if you're thinking about setting up a business or an idea. The business model canvas, it was invented by Alex Osterwalder. And he's very Googleable, he's very well known. If you Google him, you will find a lot of information on that. And one of my favorites is Lego Series Play. After I did my postgrad in innovation, I went on and qualified as a Lego Series Play facilitator because I'm so addicted to it. But it is an absolutely marvelous tool for getting people to get outside their heads, engage their heart brain and their gut brain. And it deals with metaphors. So you describe everything around the brick. So you could use one simple brick to describe an entire business, but it takes the focus from the person onto the bricks. I could go on for ages about it, but I won't, because I know we're going to be handing over to Lollie now in a minute. But if you do want to know any more, please do get in touch with me. And I would just ask you to think about what is the one thing you're going to do today to start thinking differently. And I know Ria or Neve are going to pop up contact details and share them in the links with you. So thank you. I will hand over to Lollie. I can see you're waiting there. And I know Lollie has loads of really interesting information to share with you. So off you go, Lollie. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. That was amazing. And I'm going to rethink how often and how soon I have my morning cup of coffee now, because it's definitely not an hour and a half after waking up. But thanks, Hannah. That's absolutely brilliant. All right. I'm just going to share my slides for you guys now. Moving forward now. There we go. So, okay. So I promise you this won't be death by PowerPoint. Apologies. All right. They seem to be stuck. Give me a second. There we go. All right, I might just go through them manually, but I'm going to be talking about innovating your career with design thinking. And I'm going to be building on some of the things that Hannah has said here as well. So, sorry, give me 1 second now. I'll try and come back into that now. It's not playing ball, of course. Good old tech. There we go. Okay. So I'm basing some of this work on a book called Designing Your Life by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. And you don't need to buy the book. You could go to, I should probably not say that online, but you can Google it and see an awful lot that you can pull out of it that way as well. But it is a particularly good book. And mine is a very well-worn version, as you can see here, dog-eared. And I do particularly love this. Now, I'm just going to be talking about designing your career, but I'm also going to be showing you how I've applied it to my own life. And I love the word joyful and flourishing. So I would say, yes, we can all get there if we want to. Most of you will be here because you want to make a change, or you're thinking about making a change, or you have to make a change because you're dying a death in what you're currently doing. So I help people apply design thinking to some of these wicked problems, as I call them, which is that I am currently drowning in my current job, for example, or I feel completely unfulfilled, or there's got to be something more and something else to all of this. And of course there is. But the work-life system that we have was built in the Industrial Revolution, and the old 9-to-5 is just not suiting us that much anymore. So there are some nice innovative approaches like the 4-day work week, for example. But of course, the C word that we no longer want to mention has afforded us some opportunities to say, okay, what is this work-life balance, and where does it begin and end? And should I be as busy as I am in doing what I'm doing, or am I out of kilter? And so a lot of you will be here because you are feeling that imbalance. And so I completely identify with that. And I've tried to make some changes myself in terms of that. And I know that that's what Hannah does to help people as well. So we're going to concentrate on these wicked problems. Now, design thinking also is not just that lovely algorithm that was shown there, and I'm going to be coming back to it in a second, but it's a mindset. It's a way of kind of having that curiosity. And again, it is seeing the world with the eyes of a child and kind of going back to that curious thing. Adulting seems to kill off that creativity in us, and we don't have time for play, or it just seems one more thing to do. But playful attitude towards life is really, really key to all of that. But of course, we also have to pay the bills and make sure that everything is in a place before we can afford ourselves that luxury. So part of the problem, I would see it, is we don't even daydream anymore. We're so busy taking in data from our phones, and we do really, really need to switch off as much as possible to allow this creative process to occur. But it's also about radical collaboration. And what I mean by that is talking to people that you wouldn't normally talk to and going out of your comfort zone. So most of the time when I'm putting people into teams in design thinking processes, I will do it with randomly allocated teams because they get the best reactions and the best results, rather than a sort of a formula for a team. So talk to as many people as you possibly can about your ideas when you're thinking about making a career change, because you just never know. And a lot of it's networking. And then also a bias towards action. It's all well and good deciding to make a change, but how are you going to do that? And the design thinking process is really useful for moving forward. So you've already seen this from Hannah. It is from Stanford, and I'm going to be taking you through it a little bit now in terms of ways that you can apply it. So the traditional problem solving then is about a repeatable, proven process. I need a job, therefore I'm going to get my CV and dust it off, and it's probably the same old dusty CV you send out to everybody, and it might even have your primary school on it and go back to when, and you're going to sort of send that out and hope to get different results. And you're not going to get different results by doing that same old tried and tested way. What you are going to hopefully do is have a think about design thinking, which is to say, I need to have a responsive practice, so that that CV needs to be responsive to each particular job in the case of that example, but also building it for what the company are looking for. So it's about getting outside and listening, talking to people in that particular occupation if you can get hold of them, but also really having a look at what it would feel like to be in a different type of job, and what kind of approach do you need to have in order to get yourself ready into the mindset for that different job. So it's about not being stuck inside, getting outside and talking to people, getting out of your comfort zone, telling stories. I'll come on to that more in a moment, but also talking about your experiences and your feelings, because what I'm hearing from industry, and part of my job, I'm an anthropologist, part of my job is qualitative data gathering. So I go to industry on a very regular basis to build the research, to design the courses that we design in UCD. And I'm saying to them, what kind of people are you looking for? At the moment, they're saying the transversal skills of problem solving, critical thinking, the ability to adapt, they're the main key factors. It's not whether you've got experience in that particular area or not, it's the adaptability. So when I'm working with people, I would say to them, give me an example of a time that you were adaptable, and how can we work that into your CV, and talk about, what it is that you're looking for. The good news for all of you is that this is very much an employees market at the moment, as opposed to an employers. So what we're finding is that there is an issue with talent acquisition and talent retention for a lot of companies, especially in Ireland. And at the moment, there's a fair bit of cherry picking that you can do if you can find out as much as you can about that company, to say, do you know what, I hadn't thought about you before, but I've just gone through a bit of a process of ideation and thinking about different types of jobs. I don't have a background in this, but I actually would like to be more involved. So that's what the design thinking process is really useful for, making that transition or that pivot. So the first phase is empathy, finding out as much about how am I feeling and what am I feeling right now in order to make that change. So taking stock of where you're at. So what is your work-life balance like? Where do you play? And I'll come on to these different categories now. So work is the things you're paid to do mostly. It's also schoolwork and homework. It's also service work, and it might be caring work. It certainly might be shift work. If you're a woman, you'd be doing second or third shift potentially as well in your families. That's work, and some of it's unpaid. But also play. When are you playing? When are you getting out there and experimenting? And this is what Hannah was talking about, is we just forget about it as adults, and we really need to do it to fire up our creative selves. And then the other section is human relationships. Are you so much stuck behind Zoom that that's the only interaction that you're having? Definitely ticks a box for me. And I've started to make some new changes now about getting out into the world a bit more as we all sort of evolve back out of the COVID times. And then about your health, where are you paying attention to that? Because unless you're building up a positive amount of healthiness, what you're not going to be able to do is have the capacity, either brain or physical, to make these changes or to do things. So just take stock in terms of this. I've put there jokingly the work-life balance, May, because for most of us, it's not equality, and we need to have a look at where it is and what's going to help us moving forward. So what area could improve with innovation? What area needs a bit of action? And I'm talking about, potentially just, being more active and working those habits, as Hannah said in. Where are you full and where are you empty? Are you empty after a day's work? It's all well and good saying to you that, I think it was 9 hours after you wake up is the most creative time. But if you're starting at 8 and finishing at 5 o'clock, that's 9 hours. You're exhausted from the work that you're doing. So is there a different kind of work that you could do to allow that creative process so that you can make change? Or are you just living to work at the moment? And so as we move forward with these decisions to make changes, yourself when you take stock, and some of you might want to do like a river of life to see where you've come from in terms of when did you choose college? When did you decide to make a move to the city? When did you have kids, if you did have them? When did you change jobs? And all of these major milestones that are there. And what was the motivation behind all of that? Did it just occur out of necessity? Was it a choice? Was it an adventure? What are the downsides of it? What does it cost you? And what is it costing you at the moment? And for many, many people, mental health and mental and physical health is part of the issue, is that they don't want to work in the way that they're working. We weren't designed to work in a sedentary fashion as we currently do. If we're sitting behind Zoom for 8 hours a day, our mental and our physical health is going to suffer. So what changes can we make in order to adapt to that? And so how satisfied are you? And this is just another way of looking at that work-life balance in terms of recognition or results that you're getting. Where's an area for creative self-expression in your job? Is there one at all? What's your relationship like with your manager and your team, with your co-workers? How are you generating results, and do you feel satisfied by what you're getting, or is it just a paycheck? Because I'm not a fan of turning your passion into your business necessarily. I'll give you the example of if you're an amazing crocheter and you love to crochet, and you go, right, I'm going to create an entrepreneurial business based on crocheting, and you get an order in for sort of 100 pieces, you're not going to like crocheting very much, or even 1,000 at the end of it. So It is about finding something that you can plug into that's going to make you satisfied and happy, but it's not necessarily taking your hobby and making your business out of that. So this is not a bad wheel to kind of have a think about where the deficit, where you're empty and where you're full, and where you would like to generate more. And so defining, of course, the problem you're trying to solve. What is the problem you're trying to solve? For many people, it's burnout. And I was reading just this morning that about 50% of people in Ireland at the moment are unsatisfied with their job, so that's not a great place to be. What kind of workplaces of the future can we create to have more satisfaction, but also how can we as workers ask for things that are going to make us happier? How can we seek out jobs that are going to give us more satisfaction, so we're not burnt out at the end and we've nothing left for our family and friends and ourselves? So the next phase of the design thinking process is ideation. This is the good bit. This is the bit where you sit and you think, okay, what could I possibly do in terms of building multiple revenue streams? And so my work in the Innovation Academy in UCD is to help people identify some of these areas, and we run courses for this. And in the ideation phase, what you're looking for is there something that I can do that's going to build some capital to enable me to either change jobs or to make some changes where I've got a different work-life balance? And by multiple revenue streams, I'm talking about 2-3 different forms of income potentially, and trying to find that balance between them. So we would use mind mapping as a way to, we use semi-random word association to access intuition. I know Hannah's very good at that. That's the kind of coaching work that she does, but it's generating ideas around best ideas. What could I possibly do? What am I good at? Where do my talents lie? And how can I turn that into something that's going to support me? So here's a really good place to start. What gets you out of bed every morning? It might just be the alarm clock to say, okay, it's time to go to work, and you have this kind of feeling about what you're doing. Now, the Japanese have this beautiful term called Ikigai, which is the motivation to get up and to do something. It's not always paid work. Sometimes it's work that's, that's contributing to society. Sometimes it's, I can't wait to see my team, or I can't wait to get through my to-do list. But also, what's leaving you drained? And what's taking away from that motivation and that Ikigai, the idea of finding a purpose or a sweet spot between making money, passion, interests, and looking after ourselves so that we can flourish. And so wild ideas. We started with wicked problems, and we're moving to wild ideas. We would call them blue sky thinking. What are the craziest things that you could think of? Because some of them sometimes could stick. And in a minute, I'm going to show you some of the crazy stuff that I thought of that I made businesses out of, to give you an example of that. But what do you really love to do? What do you want to do with yourself? In the words of Mary Oliver, the poet, what are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? We're only here once, as far as I know. So, we kind of don't want to spend all of our time on that hamster wheel. So what else can I do to generate happiness in myself, but also to give myself different income streams? So final step then, apart from testing, is prototyping. How can I find out more about an area that I'm interested in, or I've got a hunch that I would like to be in a different form of work? Well, can you have interviews with people informally? Can you talk to HR consultants? Can you go to information sessions? Everything is online. Can you go to workshops? There's so much free, especially through LinkedIn and through, Eventbrite. What about job shadowing or volunteering or part-time work? Perhaps you've thought, God, wouldn't it be amazing just to give everything up and just work in a cafe? Maybe I'd run my own cafe. Maybe you can get some part-time work as a barista. Maybe you can get some online training. Maybe you need to go back to college in a more formalized fashion. But trying to get that experience to try things on for size before you make a jump is a really good way of prototyping to see whether they're going to work for you. And so ultimately, this is about you and your story. So where do you fit in all of this? Are you returning to work after a break? Are you trying to get work at the moment from redundancy? Are you in one of those sections that was most affected by COVID? Are you pre-entrepreneurial? Do you have a business idea and you're kind of incubating it, but you don't really know where to start? And where can you go for help for that? Are you trying to get career progression because you want to change? Do you need to go traverse sideways before you can go up? Is the company you're working for the company that you want to be working for, and you need to, to reevaluate or have them reevaluate your role there? Do you need to reinvent your career from start to finish, top to bottom? Or do you just know you need a change and you want to make a bit of a difference in your life, but you don't know where to start? Design thinking's a really good place to be. So this is the way we look today, the one on the right, the squiggle career. In the old days, it would be, I'm going to college to become a, or I'm going to train to become a carpenter, pharmacy assistant, doctor, lawyer. I'm going to own my own shop. You know, it was a very sort of clear trajectory first, and we don't have that anymore. So what we do have is this fantastic term, squiggle career, which I come back to again and again, because for most of us, we've kind of gone around the block a few times before we've got to something that we feel is tangibly ourselves and that we would like to do for you know, more long term. So start where you are with all of these different things and realize that your path is unique to everyone else's. And how can you sell that uniqueness? How can you package it up and even brand it for a company to find you? Because as I go back to those transversal skills of problem solving, critical thinking, adaptability, that's what they're looking for. So how can you prove that you have all of those? Well, you can, because you're still here and you've had to go through all these different metamorphoses in order to get where you're going. So if you don't want to be in the career that you're in, talk about what else you've done in order to reframe the situation. So a good way to start is to have a think about what you're great at. I am great at X, Y, and Z, and I do my best work with. So if you do your best work with people face to face, that's the environment, and what kind of people. So these are the kind of things you want to be working your CV back from, rather than kind of going in with just sort of this chronological CV. And you want to be thinking about what you're really good at. So it turns out I'm really good at storytelling. Now, for an anthropologist, that's not surprising, perhaps. But what I did was I went on to make businesses out of storytelling. So I'm going to show you some of that in a minute. But if you're feeling overwhelmed at this particular stage, and I don't blame you, and most of our students coming in for these kind of courses are very overwhelmed at the beginning because they're at that pivot or change stage, this is the design thinking squiggle. And so if you can see that you're overwhelmed, you're on the left there. You're trying to understand the problem. You're not expected to have a solution after 15 minutes with Hannah and 15 minutes with me today. You've got to work through a process, but also the solution will come. You're on the journey and the first step is just now. So stay in the mess for a while until you can start to research other businesses, and then it'll start to focus in a little bit more, and at least you'll know what you don't want to do more than what you do want to do. So what made you happy as a kid? And I know this is something Hannah and I love to talk about. What inspires you? So there I am on the right in the depths of London in the 1990s, the happiest punk you ever did see. And it turns out even back then, I was really involved with sort of social impact and social justice. And I was a bit of an anarchist, or so I thought. And I'm really good at telling stories. And it turned out I was sort of doing that just naturally anyway. So when it came to actually telling stories, I've started to go, and this isn't paid work, of course, but I started to go into competitive storytelling. And I really, really found my place. And this was my hobby. So again, you don't need to turn your passion into what you're doing, but a hobby is a really good place to start about, you know, cultivating your creativity and your skills. So I started telling stories competitively, and then I built businesses out of that same storytelling thing. So I decided to go back to college at 37. I was waitressing for 3 years in Wagamama's. I was about to be made manager, and I decided I didn't want to be a waitress anymore, and I just could do more. So I went back to college, and 7 years later, and multiple different jobs of trying on different things for size, I came out with a qualification that enabled me then to get back into academia. But these two streams were going side by side, academia and storytelling. So at the same time, I created a company called Marry Me Ireland, which was the year before the referendum on same-sex marriage, which was an equality-based approach to writing a wedding ceremony. And that took off, and that led to this one, which was the Irish Institute of Celebrants. So now I train people to do the last 7 years to do weddings and funerals and vow renewals and naming ceremonies, but it's storytelling. We're telling the story of the couple, we're telling the story of the deceased. And I have a team now, but my regular work is doing love story workshops, which I love, and also eulogy story workshops for people. And so I've carried on with the storytelling aspect, trying to create careers out of it. And then my third company there would be the same thing, would be a funeral company, looking at doing things your own way in terms of personalization, in terms of social justice, in terms of equality. All of these themes have run through everything that I've done. But if I look back with hindsight now, it seems obvious: anthropology, storytelling, Ireland, change. But these things emerged from the design thinking process. So, of course, there's been things that haven't worked. I'm not Midas. I can't make everything work. So I just use them as opportunities to begin again, but begin again a little bit differently with a bit more experience. So here's one that didn't work. Panic room. I was taking I was trying to get into consultancy at the time, and I was taking storytelling, and the name Panic Room is awful. It fills me with anxiety even now. And I was using drag queens to go into companies. Now, that one never got off the ground. That was a little bit too blue sky thinking, or too wild in terms of ideas. But, you know, you've got to try things on for size and see what sticks. So my advice to you guys, talk about what you want to be doing. Because I started talking about wanting to do a podcast, and lo and behold, I do a number of I talk to companies, and sometimes I get paid for it, sometimes I don't. And one of the things I said was I would really like to do a podcast talking to unusual or unexpected entrepreneurs. Lo and behold, someone in one of the audiences got in touch with me, and I ended up doing a radio show. So I now have that, which I absolutely love. Again, this is my hobby, and it's telling stories and finding the stories. Again, the same theme, run all the way through it. And then I found my tribe, which was to get in through academia into the Innovation Academy. And I help people just like you every single day who are trying to use the design thinking process to change their careers and come up with entrepreneurial ideas for new businesses. And it just seems now I'm in the best place ever because I'm doing all of these different things. Each of them make me happy. So I'd love you to connect with me. I'm going to finish there with this last slide as well, and just say, look, whatever it is that you want to do, and I know that you don't know what that is right now, or you probably don't know, see it as an adventure and see it as a ride, because you don't know where it's going to take you. Talk to as many people as possible and get as much experience as possible in an area that you think you're interested in. And the other thing is sell yourself in terms of your USP, your unique selling point. You've got something really original and unique in your story. So pull that story out and find a way to get it out there. And I just wish you the best of luck.
Oh, thanks so much, Lollie and Hannah. Both of those presentations were fantastic. They were so interesting. And all I was thinking was, gosh, I wish we had another hour. You were only getting started. So Lollie, I'll give you a minute you've just finished talking, so to grab a glass of water. But Hannah, come to you first. It was when I was listening to you mentioning about the Socratic questioning and exploring your values and beliefs. It's quite reflective work, so it immediately struck me that working with a coach would be so useful in that. Would you be able to just maybe talk a little bit more about that, the work you would do exploring the values piece and beliefs, because it's so important in that fundamental step? I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that piece.
Yeah, sure. I suppose to speak from a personal perspective, that earlier on in my career, I was in a job that I wasn't happy in, and it really struck me that I wasn't happy because it completely clashed with my values. So back then, as years ago, I worked with a coach myself, and to establish what my values are, and from there make value-based decisions. So I'll give you an example. If your core value, or one of your core values, were to be something like family, okay, and the workspace you were in made it very hard for you to get home and spend that important time with your family, that would really feel to your core like a clash, because it cuts through to your core values. So it's very important. I mean, one of mine, would be honesty, and I could not stand the sort of backstabbing that sometimes goes on in workplaces. So it's really finding out what can you do to understand your values, make decisions based on what's going to enable you to live your values. And I know that can kind of sound a little bit sort of tree huggery sometimes, but trust me, it really, really works, and it leads you to a much more satisfied place. Combine that with some of the fantastic tools Lollie was talking about, and tapping into that inner child. I think it's the place to go when you want to have a really throw the deck of cards in the air and just go, what is possible here? And then when the decks are coming back down, right, what are those ideas and which really fit with me? And while Lollie was talking there, I'm struck by a quote. It's a TED talk by Ken Robinson, and he's one of the wow, Jesus, 80 million views or something. If you just put in Ken Robinson into TED Talks, it'll come up. But he's an educator, and he talks about tapping back into that childlike creativity. And he talks about a story he heard, and he said, well, one time he was talking to a teacher in a kindergarten, and the teacher had a student in her class, and this little girl was 6 years old, and she never concentrated, never listened, never concentrated. And then one day they had a drawing class, and the girl was sitting there and she was happily drawing away, and she was so absorbed. The teacher went over to ask her, well, you know, what are you doing? She wanted to understand why was this massive change in the child's attention and why she was so enthralled with drawing. So went over to the child and she said, what are you drawing? The little girl goes, I'm drawing God. That the teacher said to her, but nobody knows what God looks like. The child looked up at her and she said, they will in a minute. Ken Robinson tells his story so well, but it really harks back to the fact that kids don't have the blocks, the inhibitions, and all of the negative thinking, the self-doubt that we develop, and the fear of being wrong. So if we can pull away all of that negativity, the self-doubt, and we can really enable ourselves to get very creative and harness all of that potential in our careers, but also more generally.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thank you, Hannah. And Lollie, a question for you, because you might have awareness around the environments that you noticed were really conducive to you kind of creativity. Aidan had a question just around the environment you create for yourself is key to that creativity, and I'm wondering if you have any particular ideas around this, like for example nature or whatever. Would you be able to share?
100%. It goes back to that whole idea of get outside, like kind of like get outside of your, especially now when we're all on Zoom, get outside of your comfort zone in terms of there's a huge amount to do with sort of forest bathing and sort of the benefits of actually getting out into nature. But again, it just switching off from devices is part of it. The amount of people I see walking around parks on their phones, and I'm like, if you just took a breath, you'd be fine. We used to daydream. Remember when being a kid and sitting staring out of the window for hours, and our kids don't do that so much anymore. We're plugged in too much. And what the boredom is one of the best things that can happen to you, especially as a child, is that because, I drive my daughter mad when she's like, I'm bored. I'm like, good, because that's a really positive thing for your brain, because it will start to think about things. So find a place or find a mechanism whereby you can be alone with yourself for a while. And for me, nature does really work. I do a lot of walking in forests. I find I get my best ideas on my bicycle. I don't know if it's just that my legs are pumping my brain more or get the endorphins, but I would keep a little notepad and a pen on me all of the time, and I'm very often stopping and go, God, that was a really good idea. Sitting in front of my computer or in front of Netflix is not going to generate those kind of ideas, because you're just passively taking stuff in. So finding a way to actually get out and dislocate yourself from those other responsibilities is really, really positive.
Very good. Yeah, no, that's really great answer. Thank you, Lollie. Aidan, I hope that's lots of food for thought there. So lots of lovely comments coming in the chat. Just people have found the talk so interesting, so inspiring. So that's really good. Angus has a question here. So basically, I suppose there's a scenario here where the team know they're being made redundant, but it won't happen immediately. So I suppose it's there's a question there around keeping people motivated. When people are maybe waiting for a redundancy payment. So
it's like waiting for the hammer to drop, isn't it? the guillotine, at the end. Like that. I mean, that's a really hard situation to be in. But to understand that, most feelings are fear-based. They're coming from the fear of what will I do, how will I cope, and sort of helping those people transition. I don't know whether this person is involved in the senior management level of that company or not, but helping the people transition into what they're doing next will help them also be good at what they're doing here. So it's like the elephant in the room. If you don't talk about what's going to happen, everyone's secretly going, oh God, I'm so worried, I'm so worried. Have the conversation, embrace the fear. What are your biggest worries? How can we as a company help you transition into something else? So that kind of lead up, seeing that kind of lead up is an advantage rather than a disadvantage. Can we enroll our students on a course? So for example, the current course I'm teaching is a grad cert in creativity, entrepreneurship, and innovation. It's 2 mornings a week over 6 months. You know, can they release students? Can they release people into something like this so that they can retrain? So by the time the redundancy does occur, they feel there's a transition. Ignoring the transition is not going to work for people, because, you know, it's incredibly demotivating. So I would even just open it up by having the head of that company, and not an HR person, but the actual leader of that company, say, listen, I understand this is really difficult and we don't know when it's going to happen. How can we best support you in this transition to move forward? And at the same time, I would do a bit of looking back and to say, what's been great about this company for you? And just to, it's almost that we would do it almost, it sounds strange to do it, to talk about funerals, but we would do it in funeral celebrancy a little bit, where we would say the eulogy can be in 2 ways, chronological or thematic. Let's have a look at the thematic aspects of their story. What did they love about this company? And what can we take forward? If it's very sad this company is going, but ultimately, I'm a bit of a Buddhist, all things change, you know, so we have to kind of be better about going, oh my God, it's changing, to say, okay, it's changing. What do I need to do to transition? So see that if it's 2 years or 5 years, see it as a transitional period, and then be able to support your team moving forward from that into something else.
Angus, I would say that's the best 3 minutes of advice you've got in a while. That's fantastic.
I would just add on to the end of that, Angus, don't forget yourself in that equation. It's like in the airplane, you can't put on their oxygen masks first, you have to put on your own. You need to look after yourself and your own mental health, and not gloss over there can be a lot going on in your system that you're not even aware of. So try and take time to tap into that, look after yourself, and then you can look after your team.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, thanks.
There's a really wonderful podcast and a team behind a company called Shapes of Grief, and they talk about all change as being possibly, you know, leading into grief, and redundancy would be one of them. And there's quite a few on their podcast, and they're on Spotify, around redundancy and what that feels like, because we need, as Hannah said, we need to give ourselves time to adjust to the process. You know, and so all change can be very discombobulating, but I will say it can also be very energizing and very freeing. And very often you'll look back and go, God, you know what? That awful thing that happened to me was the best thing of all.
Yeah, absolutely.
With hindsight.
Hannah, a question from you, from Niall, I hope I'm pronouncing your name all right. Is there a danger in, and I suppose this is, maybe the curiosity or fear around the inner child. Is there a danger in assessing your inner child that people that you're working with will see you maybe as a bit more immature or unrealistic, or they're not taking you seriously? Do you ever come across that scenario like that when in coaching?
Yeah, I suppose it depends. I would ask now a little bit more information on that. But in accessing your inner child, there's a lot of trust involved. And, you know, for you to go through the type of creativity that design thinking is encouraging, which is everything is okay. It's okay to come up with the craziest ideas. And if you were a 5 or 6 year old sitting there with crayons drawing on the wall, you know, what kind of stuff would you come up with? How nuts can you go? To be in that environment in a group, you need to create a safe space first to do that. I mean, you can't have a toxic atmosphere in work and suddenly expect people to be comfortable enough to share what they might be putting themselves at risk reputationally. It's something that they might not be comfortable. So you've got to create the psychological safety first. If you're in a place where there is some light banter, some good atmosphere, you can leverage that. Go in gently first. But you can always build on it. It is an exercise, a muscle that needs to be exercised. And I'd say Lollie comes across a lot of that with students that are joining the program in that pure discomfort stage first of, oh God, I couldn't possibly, you know, describe myself, as we were talking about earlier, using a kitchen utensil. But, you know, putting people in a little bit of discomfort can actually be a great way also, ironically enough, to tap into the creativity in their brain. So sometimes when I'm working with coaching clients and they're having a brain block and they want to have some different thinking, it's pushing them a little bit into discomfort, not too far, and staying with them in that space and then coming back into an area of comfort.
Super. Thanks so much, Hannah. Both of you have shared so much resources and so much information in such a short space of time. Thank you so much. And the only issue we have now is we're coming up against the clock. Otherwise, we could be here till 4 o'clock. I hope Lollie and Hannah, both of you get even a moment just to check the chat and see all the lovely comments. Lollie, someone's even mentioning the course there and how much they've enjoyed it and recommend it. So excellent advice. I hope this is only the start of conversations for lots of people around this space, and both of you generously shared your contact details and LinkedIn profile, so it's brilliant. So I am very quickly going to hand over to Niamh. Hannah and Lollie, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Niamh will pop up on our screen now because I know she just wants to add a few more closing comments.
Thanks a million, Michelle. As usual, great steer on the audience questions, and thank you, Hannah and Lollie. I think you've reignited everybody's creative sides after that. It was fantastic. Just a few things to mention. So remember, if you are a student or if you've graduated from UCD in the past 2 years, you can take advantage of the many events and consultant advice from the UCD Careers Network. So Ria's going to pop the link in the chat there now. And thanks to all of you who tuned in this afternoon. It was such a great turnout. You can connect with both Lollie and Hannah on LinkedIn after the session, so both their profiles are going to be posted in the chat as well. You can also find the slides from today's fantastic presentations, as well as numerous other resources in the What It Takes Resource Hub, which is on the UCD Alumni Network. So that link is going to be put in the chat also. And then just a few final notes on some upcoming events before we wrap up. So you might be interested in our next What It Takes webinar, What It Takes to Flourish in Your Early Career, on the 11th of May at the same time of 1 o'clock. And you can sign up for this extra special interactive session through the link in the chat. So that'll be great. And finally, this series aims to support our UCD community with career development opportunities, but I'd also like to mention our commitment to supporting our students through the COVID crisis. So generous funds have been raised thanks to alumni and friends of UCD like you. If you would like to support our efforts to provide urgent financial and mental health support to those students who need it most, you can also visit the link in the chat that will be posted now in a minute. So that's all from all of us. Thank you so much again for joining us this afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you again next time on May 11th. So Gurmi and Magriv, take care.